Hello, and can you hear me? Thank you. Excellent. Okay, first off, glad to see a lot of you are back with us, and I'm guessing and hoping that means everybody is safe and healthy and well. I am very glad to see that. And I see that we got some questions going here. And some also thank you for the well wishes. It is really quiet, so you need me to beef this up. Okay, how does that work? Okay, still pretty quiet. We'll give that a try then. See if that makes it better. I can go a little bit more, but I don't want to overdrive this. And I think I'm at the point where if I put it up any bit more, then we'll probably overdriving this. So I'll just get a little closer to the mic and see if that makes it better. Okay. Oh, excellent. And I'm glad to see that our grading assistant, Bhagyashri, has joined us as well. So glad to have her on. And Bhagyashri, I'm going to set you to unmute so you can chime in anytime that you want, like. Okay, so let's start off, I guess, with the questions on the board here. There's been a couple of comments now about Respondus. And so to clarify, what we're doing here is I'm using the lockdown browser, but I'm not using the Respondus feature. I have been told that the performance is fine at this university, San Diego State, that uh, the server seems to be fine to provide the services that we need for for hosting the exams using this so far. We haven't really heard about from the IT department any issues with performance yet, but we will watch that. So if there are some issues starting up, then we will readdress it. But at this time, I'm going to go ahead and use the lockdown browser, but I am not intending to use the Respondus feature, which I think is the biggest consumer of the bandwidth anyway. See, another question that was coming up. Oh, and just to clarify too, is that the the lockdown browser and the Respondus features are all part of the Blackboard. They're all integrated into Blackboard itself. So the exam's actually being is being managed through Blackboard. That is where I've written the tests. That's where I've written the mini exam that you will be seeing tonight. But I'll also have the exam number 2 written inside of Blackboard as well. And we're just using these features for distributing and executing the exam. So yes, you will need to write the answers in the lockdown browser. Now yes, that is very true. So copying pasting is not going to be an option there. That is the downside to that. But that's, I think, a fair trade-off for making sure that we have who we say we have working on these exams, and that you've got your own material that you're working on in the exam, just like you would in the classroom. There's no copying and pasting in the classroom either, so that should be good. And hopefully everybody saw the comment that Bhagyashri just made about the grade 4 assignment 2. You will see that the STD has been graded, and she has posted the points for it. Now, I originally set that for 20 points, but after we discussed it, I agreed 26 points is fine. So the points that you see in assignment 2 right now are out of 26 possible points. And then the remaining amount of points is what you'll be earning when you turn in the full project. And so you'll just be adding the additional project files to assignment number 2 when you are ready to turn that in. So one of the questions, and I think it's reasonable, is to allow more time for the exam. I don't have a problem with that because I do understand different people have different typing skills, and it's general. And for some people, you can type faster than you can write. Some people, you can type much slower than you can write. So we will accommodate that. Of course, that's one of the skills as a computer scientist. If you go into the field of programming, right, that's one of the things you really do want to work on is getting those typing skills up. But for the exams, no, that's not really part of what we're grading is your typing skills per se. Great question about the mini exam tonight. So when you get in there, you will see that these are extra credit points. I'm giving you 15. Yes, you're going to be using the lockdown browser for the mini exam because I want us to do a trial run here. I want everybody logged in there using it. We'll get an idea of performance. You'll get an idea of how well this works on your machines, how it's set up for this class. And I also want to get a chance to make sure that I worked out things on my side for doing the grading of these and getting those out. If you're hearing audio other than this, you might have some browser open with audio running in the background there or something else because I've set this by default. Everybody enters with mute on. So the mini exam will be, I've given you 15 minutes to complete the exam is the way that's set up. No, it's set up to start at 18:30 tonight. You need to have the lockdown browser on your machine. You'll be getting from Blackboard should issue you the exam through the lockdown browser, and you'll have 15 minutes to complete it. It shouldn't take you even close to that long. It's pretty simple, but the idea is for you to become familiar with it, so it could take time. Not at 1830. 490 doesn't start till 1900. See, some people are looking into this and are familiar with the lockdown browser and Blackboard testing in general. So yeah, the way I set this up is that it'll be available at 18:30. That's when you can start the exam. You have 15 minutes to complete it. You must log, if you want to get credit for doing these extra credit points for doing the mini exam, you need to complete it, and that means you need to start it by 16 minutes before midnight, because at 23:59 tonight, it's going to shut down. Okay, I see a question here about Chromebook. Yeah, I don't remember seeing that listed as an option for this. Do you have access to other devices? I understand there's even an iOS version. I think there's an Android version, but I don't. Well, no, if there's an Android version, that would work. So no, I don't. I have to go look at that unless somebody else knows. And yes, to clarify, 18:30 tonight to 23:59 is the range of times for doing your 15-minute mini exam. Then there was a question about software engineering material. You read my mind. There is going to be a question about software engineering in there. I think you'll like it too. And thank you for the update. I do recall seeing that now that you phrased it that way, not compatible with Chrome, so you must have pasted that in. So yeah, let me know if you cannot find an alternative to the Chromebook, but I don't know if there's a place you can go to, or if you go into, or if somebody else is that you can borrow for the exam. Work with us on that. Keep us posted. The question about grading on the mini test, was it completion or correctness? Yeah, you'll see these are very easy questions. That's why I said no studying was required. You don't need to worry about that. And this exam will require very little typing. It's not going to be. So one thing I should explain about the mini exam is that this is not an example per se of how my exams look. This is basically an exercise for us to be able to ensure that we've got these kinds of questions worked out in advance of exam number 2, that I can set this up, get this out to you. Everybody can access the exam. They have a chance to work a few questions in there and turn in the exam. We get to do the grading on it and get that back, get results back out to you, and make sure we've worked through anything that we're not familiar with before exam number 2. That's really the purpose of this. And hopefully you're looking at Bhagyashree's comment there. That's an important point to emphasize. And writing correct answers really means include details. This is what we were talking about for exam 1. Be sure that you're focused on providing the details for the answers and not a bunch of prose saying the same thing a couple times, just a different way, or creating or writing down vague answers. You want specifics, detailed topics covered with specific detailed responses. Okay, so that's what we're going to be grading you on. is making sure that you understand the material. And the only way we can do that is by providing those details to us and the answers to these questions. So as far as the format for exam 2, it's going to be similar to what you were doing for exam number 1, because there are prose style responses or essay style responses that you can use in the Blackboard exams. I understand there's a number of, particularly in some of your elective courses or your general education courses rather, where they typically will use multiple guess, fill in the blanks, and things like that that are pretty straightforward to do. But at a senior level computer science program, we're expected you to be able to describe and solve problems. And you can't solve problems and just show that by saying, oh, pick B. It just doesn't demonstrate that you have a good grasp of the technical details behind it when you do that. So questions about going back and look at the study guide where I focused for chapter 4, I focused on 4.1 and 4.2. And that's because that's really where most of what I was just talking about, the critical thinking that you're going to be doing is really captured. There's some stuff in the other subchapters in 4 that we could cover, but not, it doesn't really, the questions, at least the end of chapter questions, don't really get into that very well. So the things that we focused on in our discussions are really the things I'm looking at and for you to be able to do on the exam. Oh, and to clarify about the software engineering, I was referring to the mini exam. We'll have questions about software engineering. The software engineering is being captured in assignment number 2. So I'm not going to be testing you on the software engineering part in this course. That's background that's going to help you with your assignment number 2, not testable on exam number 2. The question about free response answers on the test or essay style responses, that's basically going to be the bulk of the exam. Most of them will be you either writing out a detailed response to the questions, or if I provide you with some code and it needs to be corrected, or if I provide you with some code and some blanks, you need to be able to do that. And I will be mindful of the fact that you are writing this typing this inside of an essay box format. So I will be mindful of that, and I've designed it accordingly. Clarissa, yes, great question. I feel bad. I really, really wanted to have that done before we met tonight. I apologize, I have not. I do know that all of your grades will be going up. I just don't have those exact numbers yet, and I still will be uploading those. Yes. So they will not be staying as they are. There will be additional points given for everyone that I've seen so far. And I was very pleased as well about the scores that I saw on the SDDs that were turned in. That made me feel much better as well. I'm glad everybody's was working hard on that and doing a good job. And a reminder about the study guide is that if you recall the study guide for exam number one, we were using the end of chapter questions, which are they're designed for U.S. students to go back into the material and the topics discovered in our discussions to see how well you understood it, to be able to then develop answers. It would take too long to do that in an exam format. So what I do is I take the topic and I write it in such a way where you can answer that particular question and the amount of minutes that I've given you for that particular question. So it's going to be more focused on some very specific things as opposed to here's a broad concept and now tell me how you would do this type of response is not appropriate really for exams. So that they're going to be a little bit different. Again, these questions that I selected here were more representative of those broad topics that I will then ask more detailed questions about. And the question about skipping questions and coming back, yes, I saw that option in there, and I don't see. I'm not going to force you to do each question one right after the other. No, you can go through them in the way that you want to, that you choose to answer them in the order that you choose to. Since we have a little pause here, I guess I'll ask you a question then. And hopefully you've been doing some studying and you feel like you're prepared and you're ready, or you're just now getting, well, I won't ask you for just now getting around to studying for the exam, but I'm hoping that everybody did take some time already and they're not just now starting to look at this, and hopefully everybody's feeling good about their preparations at this point. Okay, seeing some good comments. And yeah, and understand you got to manage your time such that you get sleep, right? So you want to make sure you're getting rest. And I understand too, you have other classes, and most classes are setting up exams this week. I do understand that. I do appreciate that. That's very common, unfortunately, but it is very common across universities. So I hope you're factoring in sleep and rest as well, because that's important for you to function. Okay, a couple of interesting questions here. That's how how do previous classes perform on exam two versus one? They typically do better. Actually I've never seen a class that did the same or worse on two than they did one. All of them performed better on exam two. And the question about a solution set for extra problems in three and four, are you asking about having me assign additional questions from those subsections? Okay. And no, I'm expecting a lot more than a D. Come on, come on, come on. So that's a really good point about the modification records. About what you're really talking about is uh, testing material that we presented right before the exam. So in this case here, we actually had an extra week between the two. Granted, you're taking time off because it is time off, but also it's an opportunity for you to get some hours in preparing for exams. However, having said that, I you'll notice I focused in chapter 4 on mostly materials from 4142 with a couple of comments about some simple macro expansions, and I would expect you to be able to do that. So I'm trying to avoid doing things that we did at the end of right before we went into exam, but those are testable as well. And they should be, normally they would be fresh on your mind, but of course we have had the week off. So I'm just trying to do what I can to make sure we're focused on the material that you've had a chance to ask questions on mostly. Great questions. So yes, I'm going to have a mixture of conceptual questions as well as ones that you will work out by hand. This is a great couple of chapters for doing that because just as an example, the macro expansion one, right? That's some place that you could actually do that and test out both understanding the theory, which is what the exams are mostly focused on, as well as some practical as far as doing some expansions to demonstrate that you understand the theories. So there will be some of that, yes. And taking John's question here, that was the comments I was referencing a little bit earlier when we were talking about formatting of our responses inside of the essay box. Because essay boxes, as you know, are designed to be, um, well, they're not designed for us. They don't have everything in nice, neatly monospaced fonts, although there are some font selections. And I was looking at that but still I want to set this up so that you don't have to spend time focusing on clean formatting inside of the exam response box. I'm taking that into account, and I'm not going to be looking for you to have everything neatly aligned because we unfortunately don't have an IDE with some sort of a lockdown browser with an IDE built in it where that can do all of those things for us. Unfortunately, even though we vent and build and test these systems that are doing things like lockdown browsers, we haven't built one of those for ourselves yet. Okay, Andrea, good question. Honestly, I haven't decided how I wanted to do that. My thought was I open it up at 17:30 and it's a timed exam and everybody completes it. Uh, letting it letting you have a range of days, I don't like that. Having a range of times outside of that, I'm not really a great fan of that either. But Wednesday, do I open it up earlier than our 17:30 meet time? I could consider that. Haven't I'm not I haven't decided on not doing that yet. But let me ponder that. Or actually, I'll just throw that out there. Is that something that is helpful to a number of you, or is having it at the time that you've already locked in for this lecture anyway the best for you? Alexander, that is a fantastic point. Not everybody's home environments are set up on a schedule like in the lecture room where it's nice and quiet and you can think and not have the distractions. And people have different times at home environments when they do have periods where they could be distraction free or mostly. That's a really good point. I think you just pushed me over the edge on that, as well as seeing a lot of these other comments where people bring up some other good points as well. But that is an important point. So somebody asked for clarification about the lockdown browser. And the lockdown browser is what you'll download, and that's what you'll use to get into the exam and then provide the responses to, and then turn in the exam with. There is an additional feature beyond the lockdown browser that they call Respondus, which is also the name of the manufacturer for this tool, which is why it's a little confusing. And what it does is it uses your webcam to show the us that you were actually there at that particular machine doing the exam. It's a way to get that visual ID of you actually performing your exam. I don't need that. You don't need to do that. So you don't need to worry about having a webcam. You don't need to worry about, making sure that you've actually combed your hair before you took the exam or anything like that, because we're not going to be looking at you. The fact that you can access Blackboard means that you are taking the exam as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not going to use that feature. Sounds like I'm getting a lot of support for that decision. Great. Okay, I've seen a couple of mentions of this, so I better address this about the timing. So 1 hour and 15 minutes is what we have timed, set up time for a normal exam. But given that that you have requested that you have more time because you're now typing this in instead of writing this out as quickly as you can with pencil and paper, that I will then increase the time of the exam to help you with those issues because I'm not grading your skills on a keyboard. I'm grading your knowledge. So I will increase the time for this exam, probably 2 hours. However, I'm not increasing the time on the mini exam. It's set for 15 minutes, and most of you will probably finish in about 3. Okay, John, let's look at the issue or your question about dynamic linking. What are you struggling with? Ah, okay. So I think I understand. So yes, I'm glad you caught the part about the delaying the address resolution. From a loader perspective, what we're going to need to do then when a dynamic loader is that we're going to have to resolve those addresses at load time, whereas what you refer to as a normal loader doesn't need to do that. Everything, all the addresses have been resolved by the compiler. All it has to do is find memory addresses and then copy or read from the object file and populate memory with the contents or the instructions from that file to be able to set up memory for your program to execute correctly. However, with a dynamic linker, when the loader is uh, when the loader is doing the job of grabbing the memory locations and then populating those memory locations with either code or data from your object file, or skipping over memory addresses that aren't initialized and doing all of that work, it's also having to resolve those addresses that are referenced into other sections that weren't done at compile time. So that's why we were setting up these tables like we were talking about with the xref and the xdef, to be able to create those tables so that the loader has something it can reference when it's trying to do that address translation to generate the correct values for whatever memory addresses it's loading those control sections into. So that is the additional work that the dynamic loader has to do. It needs the additional data structures, those tables we talked about, and has to then reference those as it is populating main memory. Yes, it does. Because of being able to do that final resolution at load time, it's going to provide exactly those benefits that we talked about in the book and in our lectures. Good point. Okay, that's good. Good gouge. Back to me. Good questions. Great participation. Other questions? Yes, Ivan. I guess I'm not really sure what you're asking about, what type of instructions. The modification records, we talked about the the assembler having to generate those, and it's going to be based upon the things we talked about, whether they're absolute or not. Because if they're absolute values, they're going to need a modification record. And there's a couple of different things that can be a modification record, right? Or be an absolute values. That's an excellent example, John. Also, not just format fours, because we can have direct addresses, sometimes with format threes, and sometimes we have values that are also direct address values that we have to worry about, which is why we added that field in the table for being able to determine whether any one datum is an absolute direct, that is, or relative value. Ooh, great question, Trevor. Does somebody want to respond to that? So, some excellent responses on how. What about why? And when I say why specifically skip over that one nibble? In some cases, you need that nibble. What about the ones that are using that nibble and use O6? Okay, so look at this example. Exactly. So if you're working with an instruction, you typically will use the 05 because it has those flags. But if you're working with a datum, then you're going to want to use those, the full um, byte, not just the half nibble, or not just the half byte or the nibble. Hi, Jacob. So most of the material that we discussed in lectures were additional, just basically expanding on all the topics that were in the textbooks. So there's, other than the software engineering, which is not in the textbook. Well, there is a chapter in the textbook on it, and it's actually a fairly good read. But I'm not testing software engineering, so none of those would be part of this exam. Everything's coming basically from the textbook, but I did, describe things differently, provided more examples and stuff like that in the slides. So that's not really stuff that's different than what's in the book, although it's a different way of describing things than the author did. Difference between a subroutine and a macro. Okay, John, that's a good question. Does anybody want to take that? This is a good one. This is an important one, I should say. Excellent, Jeremy. So while most of the responses were correct, on an exam, they weren't correct enough. It's the details that we're looking for, like Jeremy described. And even then, I would go a little bit further because you're absolutely right. A subroutine will exist in memory once. And so the executing code will go into the subroutine by calling it and then return back to the place that it called it from. However, in a macro is going to expand it, which is going to require more memory of the program at runtime. And but however, as you pointed out, you're not having to set up a state machine to capture the contents of registers and all that stuff when you jump into a subroutine and then restore it when you come out of there. So the additional registers and the memory to store the contents of the registers and then restore them, plus the work to actually do that is additional work for going in and out of subroutine, but it's going to use less memory than expansions, which if you're doing a few, it's less costly, but over time, if you're doing a lot of macro expansions, it could take up a lot more memory and you got it. Right. Go to the premium. So Kyle had a question back on the M records, and this goes in hand here with the 05 and the 06, and why aren't there even more nibbles, right? How many nibbles are there in a full word? 6. Excellent. Yes. So however, when we use the 05, what we're doing is we're skipping over the opcode byte, right? So you want to skip over that byte and go to the next byte. So that's why it would be 24 instead of 23, because 23 is the address of the opcode. Then 24 would be the address of that second byte, which is the if it's an instruction, you want to skip over that first nibble and then go to the second nibble. Cool. Yeah, I was looking into the mini exam as well. It should have launched, and then I'm in there right now trying to figure out why that didn't happen. I see that when it saved this, it changed the date on me. How fun is that? So I'm setting that up now so we can get that going for you. Hang on a second. Yeah, I'm still here. It's forcing me to log back in for some reason. Okay, let's see if you can see that now. Yeah, ignore the due date. That was the problem. So even though I set up the exam dates correctly, the due date, it inherited that from another function. So that's something I'll be mindful of going forward for exam two. Yes, you do need to use the lockdown browser. Due date's wrong. You can't start it after the due date. Oh, great. Okay, let me see if I can build another one real fast. I should be able to do that. Yeah, so you can see it, but you can't start it because it had inherited a due date of yesterday for for some reason when it created this. That's what I'm trying to fix. Okay, so I'm going to have to rebuild this because it's not going to let me change the due date, and we can't start it after the due date. So I'm going to rebuild this exam, and then I'll post it. And what I'll do is I'll just set it so that you can take it. I'll set it up anytime tomorrow, and we will actually, I'll go ahead and set it up so you can take it anytime tonight through tomorrow and check it out. Let's try to do it by noon. So that way, if you have any issues, we can resolve those before Wednesday because we want to get everything working once before Wednesday. Exactly. This is why we test. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and sign out of here, and we'll send out announcements from Blackboard here when this is ready for you.